Hey everybody, it's Craig Syracusa, Walking Faith. I'm actually sitting down with a good friend of mine, and this isn't a topic that I wanted to discuss, but I felt like it was something necessary. John Heyer, I think a lot of us know John Heyer, but John Heyer, in case you aren't familiar, is the director of Scotto and Heyer Funeral Home, and is that downtown Brooklyn or South Brooklyn?
Yeah, Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn, and also Staten Island.
In Staten Island. And it's interesting. I usually, I don't like the fact that he's driving, but unfortunately, John is picking up
Yeah.
bodies, and that's for some reason I don't know why that's the term that we're using now. But is that always been the term? Is it? I mean, are you just using that so you sort of separate the emotion behind it?
No. Whenever I speak about it, I always talk about that I'm going to pick someone up, and I'm picking people up. If you listen to the news, though, you're right, Craig. You keep hearing about bodies,
Yeah.
and bodies are being put in trailers, and bodies that we all saw in the Daily News last week. They were using a forklift to move bodies. Was the news story. And I think you hit it on the head. If you start dehumanizing the person, whether they're alive or dead, I think that's a dangerous thing. And I think that's where we're at right now. We're just looking at numbers and calling them bodies, and that's not what we do, what I do, because each one of them is a person. They're all made in God's image. And there's no one more defenseless than someone who's deceased.
I
And
agree.
so that's my job, to make sure that they're taken care of.
And I want to get back into, what, like you said, I did see it on the news. I forgot for some reason I keep thinking it's Potter's Field, which is not obviously the cemetery, but the cemetery, Hope Island, I think it's something like that, where they're putting bodies using forklifts. And I was watching it, and it was just a wood box. But before we get into that, I mean, you mentioned about, they all have families. They're all, fathers, sons, daughters. They're people. And not that I even want to talk about this, but this has actually hit you directly. I mean, you had to pick up your grandfather passed, right?
Yeah. So I could tell you in the last 72 hours, just in the last 72 hours, right? So from after dinner on Easter Sunday, at 4 o'clock when I left, until last night, I've picked up 17 people who have passed. And number 14 of 17 was my grandfather, who my grandfather was positive. My parents are both positive, and my sister. My sister is doing really well now. She's fine. There's no symptoms. She's doing well. Um, my parents are still struggling. They're home on oxygen. In fact, that's why I've come 2 feet into the business, which is really a family business, and I've taken over for him and for them. And my grandfather was hospitalized and then placed in a rehab clinic because my parents couldn't take care of him, and he lives with them. And he was doing well. He was doing great. The rehab clinic kept telling us how he was doing his rehab. And then yesterday, when my mother called, they put her on hold for a long time. And then when they got back on the phone, they said that he had just passed.
Mm.
And he just passed like that. So my sister and I went and we picked him up, just like we've been picking everyone else up.
So no, I mean, I'm home, I'm comfortable, and I don't really understand like what happens now in terms of when you actually physically go to pick up somebody that's passed, regardless if it's your grandfather or not. What is it
Right.
like? I mean, is the family able to say goodbye? I know I read online and stuff that people are FaceTiming, but I mean, do you
Yeah.
even get any of that closure? And then are you able to speak with the families that have lost a loved one and comfort them, or is it so sort of separate?
No. The whole industry, just like the whole world, has changed dramatically. We were very personal. We're a family business, so we're very personal. I would say 8 out of 10 people who call us, we know their family for generations. And we're used to being together with people, and we can't do that right now. So the answer is no. All of those normal things that are very human, that interaction is gone. You can't do it for their sake, for the family's sake, for your own sake. And so when someone passes, the family cannot go there and see the person who's passed, before we take them. And after we take them, if they've died of COVID, they shouldn't see them at that point either. We're not allowing it because it's too dangerous for them. It really is. Um, And it does present a lot of issues because, think of it this way. If your loved one went into a hospital for a week or two, you haven't seen them, you couldn't go, and then you get a call that they've passed. One of the things that goes through your mind is, well, was it really my father?
Mm-hmm.
But my mother had this response yesterday. How do they know it's really him? Because she never admitted him into the rehab center. He went from the hospital to there. How do you know that that's really my dad? Obviously, being in the situation I'm in, I was able to be there to take him, and I knew it was him. But families don't have that ability to do that, and so we've been trying to help them with that by, in cases where it's okay to send a photo. Many people are just being cremated directly, and so we're sending, the tag that shows their name, and they're sending me photos, and I'm making sure that it's them for certain. In other cases, we're taking photos of them in the casket before it's sealed and doing that. In two cases, people asked for FaceTime so that they could say goodbye to their husband, or say goodbye to their mom. So, but it's not how we're made, both as an industry, as a family-run funeral home, but not how we're made as humans. We look for that visual, that human contact, and it's not possible right now. It's not safe.
So, I mean, you mentioned a couple of things about being cremated versus. So, just so I understand, there is no formal wakes, right? So, if somebody passes away, number one, how do you pick up the person that's deceased? I know you're using your family car now, which is another story. But I mean, how are you picking them up? Do you have to wear like a specific suit, a hazmat suit? Do you have to be protected? And then, are the people being cremated because they have the virus? Do you have the ability to have a wake? Or, I mean, explain that.
Sure.
I'm curious about that.
Sure. So I could tell you what our funeral home, and I would say the great majority of funeral homes are doing in the city. Okay. And that is that if the person has died of COVID-19, then they're not allowing for wakes and for visitation. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why. First of all, if the person passed, there's a good chance that one of the other family members, intimate family members, is also positive, which means now allowing a wake that would only be for 10 people, you're exposing the other 9 people to the person who is probably also positive, the one who lived with the deceased, right? So I can't, in good conscience, as a business owner, create that situation. I'm sorry, I can't create that situation and allow a wake, and knowing that now 2-3 more people in that room are going to die because we allowed this. Um, So that's one thing. People who are not dying of COVID, we are allowing for a 1 or 2 hour visitation, like a wake, only limited to 10 people. They have to keep social distance, keep their mask on, or they're able to do it only for about an hour or two, so that people aren't together for a prolonged period of time. Um, Most people are asking to be cremated. The reason for that is that most people are dying not really having been their family being prepared to bury them, and they don't own cemetery plots.
Okay.
So cemetery plots are very expensive, or can be. And so because of that huge unexpected cost, they're opting to be cremated because the cremation is more economic. And it's more on that lines. There's nothing regulating us that we have to cremate someone who dies of COVID. The families, if we do a service at a cemetery, they're able to come. We have a prayer service at the cemetery, and they have the burial. Again, only 10 people. Certain cemeteries will only allow 5 people, and you have to remain in your car for the
Yeah.
entire service.
Yeah.
You can't even get out of the car. So that's kind of the range of what's going on. Direct cremations, direct burials with the family present for a prayer service. And for those who are not dying of COVID, maybe a 1 hour viewing before going, to the cemetery. The other big issue that we have in New York City, Craig, is there are very few crematories. There's really less than a handful in the whole city of New York. And so right now, for instance, if you wanted to be cremated in Brooklyn, the next available date is mid-May
Oh
that
my.
you could get from the crematory. And that's not the funeral homes. That's the crematory. There's only a certain number of retorts, ovens, that can burn a certain amount of hours and cremate a certain number of people. And when you do the math, there are just way too many people that need to be cremated than we have the capacity for in the city of New York. And so there's a huge backlog at this point. Cemeteries, there's about a week to 2 backlog and being able to bury someone. So that's less.
Could somebody, God forbid, somebody passes away, could they hold the body until this, the COVID-19 sort of passes and says, I want to have a formal wake or a burial? Is that even possible, or is it?
It's not possible because at least in New York City and most of the state, you have to, when we file a death certificate, we have to put the date for the burial or the cremation, whatever the disposition is, and you can't file that indefinitely. The other thing is that a person is not an item to be put on a shelf in that way, right? If you have to for a temporary short period of time, it's one thing as you're waiting to perform services. But to say we're going to hold them because we want to do something 3 months from now when this clears up and hope for the best, that's not what what's supposed to happen. That's not the ethical thing to be done. And there's also lots of other issues. It's very dangerous embalming, for instance, very dangerous embalming someone who's died of COVID. To the people who are doing it. And so only in extreme circumstances where perhaps if you're shipping someone to another country for burial and the country requires it, are we taking that great risk on ourselves personally? We're taking personal risks constantly, as you mentioned. When I go to hospitals, I'm going in with hospital personnel and sometimes by myself into refrigerated trailers, 45-foot trailers, packed with, upwards of maybe 50 people in each one. And I have to go in there. I have to look for the person who passed and get them. And so the hospital's not giving me a suit to go in with. And the funeral industry is not protected under the Emergency Act currently. So it's limited what my suppliers can give me in numbers. So I can't be using gowns and discarding them every time I go into a trailer. I have to save that in case we have to do embalmings. Gloves, I have to change every time I go in and out. And my masks, I'm rotating on, I use it for every couple of trips when I go into trailers and I go into the morgues and I'm with, handling people, because there's just not enough of a supply and we have to make sure we have enough so that we're covered at some point with everything. So even doing the embalming, as I was saying, it's a great hazard as everything else is to us. So we're limiting, our ability to do embalming. And if you held someone for a long period of time, they would have to be embalmed. Is the answer to that.
That was my next question about, sort of misconceptions. And I guess one, you see on the news and you hear that there are these trailers outside filled with bodies. And obviously you just validated that. And the other thing too, there was actually a guy near me who I knew, he was 32 from my parish who passed. And, there's also these other misconceptions that, if you're 30 or 20, you don't really contract this virus. And you've obviously picked up a lot of people. I mean, is that true? I mean, and have you, has it mostly been, people like in their 80s, or has it been a mixture?
Craig, it's everyone. It's been no one under 30, I could tell you. Okay, so no one under 30 at this point. I know you read in the news, you have to have underlying health issues. Let's be honest, you could have underlying health issues in your 30s and 40s and not realize it. People live every day with diabetes and don't consider it an underlying health issue, when they're thinking. But that's a huge factor in this as well, from what I've been able to see, especially when it comes to younger people. Many of the younger people who have passed in their 40s and 50s had diabetes or were overweight. So there's lots of different things that are contributing to it, but it knows no specific group from what I'm seeing. The older people, like my grandfather, I know that it kind of tricks them a little, and it makes it seem like they're doing better.
Yes.
And then they suddenly pass.
Yeah.
So that's with them. Other people, it takes a longer time. Other people are asymptomatic. They get tested for it. They have it. They don't really have too much many symptoms at all. So it's hitting everyone very differently. But I can tell you that it's not one size fits all here.
Yeah.
It runs the gamut.
And just one other question, two more actually. You mentioned about how it's hitting us, and I've spoken to a lot of people throughout the country, pastors and different priests, even in California, and it's really hitting us very differently from them. I mean, I live in New Jersey, and I wake up and it's sunny out, and for a second I forget what's happening, and just 20, 30 miles away. I mean, you're driving your family vehicle from morgue to hospital. We're living a completely different life, and then if you take that and move it to California and other states, they're living a very different life. So now, what has this done to you? How has this affected you? Number one, I know you're a very religious guy. I know, obviously, we work together, so we know each other. So I know you're a religious guy, you own a business, but what has this done for you in terms of from your faith, but also from the standpoint of running this business?
I could say that for those who don't have faith, I don't know how they wake up in the morning. Because if I didn't have my faith, and if I didn't have the rock of the relationship that I have with Christ, I would look at all of this and say, forget this. I would go and I'd go grab as many rolls of toilet paper as I could find, I guess, right, is the first thing I do. Hoard as much and think like this is all on me, and I'm going to, just be survival of the fittest, and it's about me, and that's it. In the ministry of the funeral director, which is what this is right now, in the ministry of the funeral director, what I'm doing is being the hands of God to protect his creation and see them to their final place, as well as trying to do this to bring consolation to the living, and to bring some sense of normalcy, whatever that means anymore, to people who want to grieve. If I didn't have that, I find myself thinking about Mother Cabrini. And Mother Cabrini was, talked about a lot here in New York in the last couple of months, year. And, Mother Cabrini, she's like, it was constantly like, trust in the Sacred Heart of Jesus, trust in him who strengthens me. How was she able to do so much? She said, because it was Christ that strengthened her. And I have to believe that that's what's going on. I'm the kind of funeral director that was the funeral director with the hat and the fancy suit, and directed the funerals and made all the arrangements and never really touched the deceased, very much. And now I'm going around and I'm picking up lots of people's loved ones, and I'm doing it with a sense of mission, because it's got to be the Holy Spirit, because otherwise I would never see myself doing this. I leave my 3 kids and my wife home every day. And I'm using all universal precautions I can not to bring it home to them. But it's something that I've been called to do in a smart way. But if it wasn't for my faith, forget it. Why bother?
You are, John, I love you. You are so inspiring. I agree. I mean, this, I don't know how people live without faith. And I think during this time, everything's been stripped away. And the only thing that we can truly believe in is our faith. And I think this time will really help build other people's foundations and trust in the Lord, because what else is there? John, anyone watching this, I just want them all to pray for John Heyer and the work that he's doing. I love you, brother. Just be safe, be careful, say hello to everybody. Guys, I hope you learned something from this episode. Let's all pray for John. And always remember, guys, we have the ability to inspire and evangelize through your words and actions. God bless.